The first time I ran our transaction engine, it was on a 2014 MacBook with a cracked screen that buzzed like a dying hornet whenever the fans spun up, sitting on a folding table in a basement that smelled of mildew and stale coffee. That code? It was mine. Not mine in the petty, territorial way. I mean typed line by line, sleepless night after night, optimized down to the byte. A sprawling cathedral of logic that I held in my head all at once. A living thing that breathed data and exhaled revenue. I knew every race condition, every potential latency spike in the handshake protocol, and exactly why we used a custom encryption layer instead of the off-the-shelf libraries that everyone else blindly trusted. It was a beautiful, chaotic mess, but it was robust, handling millions of requests without a stutter, built on a foundation of sweat equity and the kind of obsessive focus that costs you relationships and weekends. But in the startup world, ownership is an illusion, a temporary state of grace before the vultures circle. And my vulture arrived in a pristine Tesla, wearing a Patagonia vest over a t-shirt that cost more than my first server rack. His name was Derek, and he was our new CTO, hired by the board to professionalize the engineering culture and prepare us for the next level of scale, which is corporate speak for gutting the soul of a product and replacing it with buzzwords and bloated microservices. Derek didn't write code. He wrote thought leadership articles on LinkedIn and spent his days in meetings talking about synergy and paradigm shifts, using words like agile and velocity as bludgeons to beat the creativity out of the room. He looked at my monolithic architecture, the engine that was currently generating the company's entire cash flow, and sneered, calling it legacy debt that needed to be strangled. I remember the first time I smelled the smoke, that specific, acrid scent of a corporate fire starting in the distance, disguised as a friendly check-in. It was a Tuesday, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the open-plan office that Derek had insisted on, surrounded by the clatter of mechanical keyboards and the performative hum of productivity. He sat on the edge of my desk, invading my personal space with the smell of expensive cologne and kombucha, and asked for a high-level documentation of the encryption keys and access protocols, framing it as a necessary step for our SOC 2 compliance audit. It was a reasonable request on the surface, the kind of administrative box-checking that keeps the legal team happy, but the glint in his eye was predatory. The look of a man who was mapping out the weak points of a fortress he intended to siege. I gave him the documentation, of course, because I was a team player, or at least I pretended to be. But I left out the one piece of information that mattered, the ghost in the machine that only I knew about. Over the next few months, the erasure began, subtle at first, like the slow erosion of a coastline. I was quietly removed from the calendar invites for the architecture review meetings. My name was scrubbed from the slide decks presented to the board, and the junior engineers, fresh out of boot camps and eager to please the man in the vest, stopped asking me for code reviews. Derek brought in his own people, a squad of yes-men who nodded enthusiastically at his terrible ideas and treated my codebase like an archaeological dig site, something to be excavated and discarded rather than maintained. They started carving up my monolith into microservices, introducing latency spikes where there had been none, breaking the atomic integrity of the transactions, and patching the leaks with sloppy retry logic that bloated our server costs. I watched it all happen from my corner of the office, which felt increasingly like a ghost box, a quarantine zone for the obsolete. I tried to warn them, tried to explain that the encryption layer wasn't just a wrapper, but a structural dependency woven into the very fabric of the data models. But Derek just smiled that condescending smile, the one that says, "I hear you, but you're wrong," and told me I was being resistant to change, that I needed to embrace the modern stack. That was the moment the sadness turned into something cold and hard, a calcified resolve to see this tragedy through to its inevitable, bitter conclusion. I realized that they weren't just pushing me out. They were trying to erase me completely, to take the thing I had built and claim it as their own, putting their names on the patent applications and the press releases, while I was quietly shuffled out the back door with a severance package and a non-disparagement agreement. but they forgot one thing. Arrogance is a blindfold. I went back to the code, not to fix their mess, but to ensure that the truth would survive the purge. I opened the terminal, the black screen reflecting my tired face, and navigated to the deepest, darkest corner of the authentication module, the place where the system validated the master encryption key on startup. This key wasn't just a password, it was a cryptographic identity, a 4096-bit RSA key pair that I had generated on that old MacBook years ago, the mathematical soul of the application. Without it, the database was just a mountain of noise, a garbled mess of random bytes that no amount of computing power could unscramble. I wrote a new function, a silent watcher I named Sentinel. It was a simple piece of logic, elegant and deadly. On boot, Sentinel would check for the presence of the master key in the secure memory enclave. If the key was present, the system would initialize normally, the Sentinel dormant and invisible. But if the key was missing, or if the system detected that the key had been tampered with, Sentinel would interpret this as a hostile breach, a catastrophic security failure. And in the event of a breach, the protocol was clear: protect the data at all costs. It would initiate a recursive wipe of the configuration files, corrupt the boot sector, and then, as a final act of spite, overwrite the encryption headers with zeros, rendering the data immutable and unrecoverable. It was a self-destruct mechanism, a digital cyanide capsule bitten down on in the face of capture. I committed the code under the guise of a security patch for license validation, burying it in a massive pull request that included hundreds of other changes. Derek approved it without reading a single line, too busy planning the launch party for Atlas 2.0, the reimagined platform that was supposed to make me obsolete. Speaking of watching things burn, if you're into watching quiet sabotage unfold and want to see how the corporate machine eats itself alive, you might want to hit that subscribe and like button, because it keeps the chaos flowing and tells the algorithm that you appreciate the darker side of tech. Back to the terminal. Once Sentinel was armed, I waited. The atmosphere in the office grew tense as the launch date approached. The air conditioner hummed, fighting the heat generated by the servers and the nervous energy of the team. Derek was in high spirits, strutting around the office, bragging about how the new architecture was going to disrupt the vertical and unlock exponential growth. He didn't know that he was standing on a trap door. The invitation to the meeting came on a Friday afternoon, the classic time for a corporate execution. "Quick sync" was the subject line, but I knew what it meant. I walked into the glass-walled conference room, and there they were. Derek, looking solemn and pained, and the HR representative, a woman I had spoken to maybe twice in 3 years, holding a thick folder. Derek gave me the speech, the one about restructuring and misalignment of skills, about how the company was evolving and my role was no longer necessary in the new organization. He used a lot of words to say absolutely nothing, his voice smooth and practiced, devoid of any genuine human emotion. I sat there, listening to the hum of the ventilation system, feeling a strange sense of calm. He expected me to argue, to beg, to cause a scene. He was prepared for anger. He wasn't prepared for silence. I nodded, signed the papers without reading them, and handed over my badge. Then, he asked for my laptop. "Standard procedure," he said, extending a hand that had never done a day of hard labor in its life. "We need to wipe it for security reasons." I smiled then, a genuine smile that probably looked terrifying. "Of course," I said. "I've already cleared my personal files." What I didn't tell him was that I had also run a specific script just before walking into the room. A script that securely deleted the master encryption key from my local machine, the only copy that existed outside of the production server's volatile memory. I handed him the MacBook, the metal warm from the processor's last exertion. "Good luck with the launch, Derek," I said. "I really mean that." He looked at me, puzzled by my lack of resistance, a flicker of doubt crossing his face for a fraction of a second, but his arrogance quickly smothered it. He took the laptop, placed it on the table like a trophy, and watched me walk out. I left the building, the sun blindingly bright after years of basement dwelling, and felt a weight lift off my chest. I was unemployed, my equity was likely worthless, and I had just spent 5 years of my life building a castle for a man who kicked me out of the keep. But I had the key. Or rather, I had ensured that nobody had the key. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and grim satisfaction. I didn't check my email, I didn't answer the phone. I just sat in my apartment, watching the clock tick down to Monday morning, the scheduled launch of Atlas 2.0. The plan was for them to perform a rolling restart of the cluster, deploying the new microservices and rebooting the core transaction engine to apply the new configurations. I knew exactly what would happen. The servers would go down, the new code would deploy, the systems would attempt to boot. Sentinel would wake up. It would look for the master key in the secure enclave. But because they were rebooting the instances on a new infrastructure, part of Derek's brilliant migration plan, the volatile memory would be cleared. The system would look for the key in the configuration files, expecting it to be injected by the deployment pipeline. But the key wasn't there. I had never committed it to the repo. It lived only on my machine and in the live memory of the old production server. When Derek's team spun up the new environment, they were spinning up a ghost. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I went to a coffee shop across the street from the office, ordered a black coffee, and opened my laptop, my personal one, to watch the public status page. At 9:05 a.m., the status indicator turned yellow. Scheduled maintenance. At 9:15 a.m., it was supposed to turn green. It didn't. At 9:30 a.m., it turned red. System outage. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, but it tasted like vindication. My phone started buzzing. First, it was a text from a junior engineer asking if I had the SSH keys for the legacy node. Then a call from the HR rep, probably realizing they needed me back. Then Derek. 5 missed calls in 2 minutes. I watched the screen light up, visualizing the chaos unfolding across the street. I could imagine the scene. The error logs scrolling faster than they could read. The access denied warnings flashing red. The realization dawning on them that the database wasn't just locked, it was actively destroying itself. Sentinel had triggered. The logic bomb was doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting the proprietary technology from unauthorized use. Without the key, the application assumed it had been stolen and was now scrubbing the drives, overwriting the customer data, the transaction history, the backups that were stored on the same mounted volumes, because Derek didn't believe in redundant storage costs. I checked Twitter. The complaints were starting to roll in. Atlas is down? Can't access my dashboard. Is anyone else getting a 404? The panic was palpable. Derek left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it, but the transcription preview read, "Sophie, we have a critical situation. We need the encryption key. The system is saying it's deleting everything. Call me back immediately. This is legal action if you don't." I laughed. Legal action? For what? For writing a security protocol that he approved? For deleting my personal encryption key from a device I was forced to surrender? For his failure to verify the backups before wiping the old production environment? This was his architecture, his launch, his failure. I sat there for an hour, watching the company's valuation evaporate in real time. The system outage banner on the website was replaced by a generic, "We are experiencing technical difficulties" message. By noon, the tech blogs had picked it up. Atlas meltdown, data loss feared. The headline was beautiful. I imagined Derek in that glass conference room, sweating through his Patagonia vest, screaming at a room full of terrified engineers who were typing furiously into terminals that were responding with nothing but errors. He had wanted a clean slate. He had wanted to erase the legacy. Well, he got his wish. The slate was clean. The legacy was gone. And so was the future. I finished my coffee, closed my laptop, and walked out into the sunshine. I passed the office building and looked up at the 3rd floor. I could see figures pacing frantically near the windows. It looked like an ant colony that had been kicked over. I felt a twinge of sympathy for the junior engineers, the ones who were just following orders, who were now frantically trying to reverse engineer a cryptographic black hole. But then I remembered the silence of the Slack channels, the stolen credit, the erasure of my name, the arrogance of the man who thought he could buy genius and discard the creator. The sympathy evaporated. I walked to the subway, the rhythm of my steps matching the beat of a song in my head, a song of justice and irrevocable consequences. The app had self-destructed. The encryption key was gone, floating somewhere in the magnetic void of a wiped hard drive. And the CTO? He was exposed, stripped naked before the board and the investors, revealed as the fraud he always was. As I descended into the subway station, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from the junior engineer, the one who had stopped asking for code reviews. It was just a screenshot of a terminal window. The last line of the log file read, "Sentinel protocol initiated. Integrity compromised. Goodbye." Below it, the cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse in the darkness, waiting for a command that would never come. I deleted the thread, turned off my phone, and stepped onto the train, disappearing into the crowd, just another commuter in a city of millions, leaving the smoke and the ruin behind me. The vindication didn't feel like happiness. It felt like relief. It felt like the silence after a deafening noise. It felt like the final, perfect execution of a program that had run its course. The doors closed and the train pulled away, carrying me toward whatever came next, while back in the office, the screens were dark, the data was dust, and the silence was finally, truly, mine. The sheer magnitude of the deletion meant that even the forensic teams they would inevitably hire would find nothing but random noise. A digital graveyard where a billion-dollar company used to be. I wondered if Derek would put that on his LinkedIn. Successfully navigated a total data erasure event. Probably. The man had no shame. But he also had no product. And in this industry, code is currency. And he was bankrupt. I leaned back against the plastic seat, closing my eyes. And for the first time in months, I didn't think about latency or uptime or the fragile state of the server cluster. I just listened to the screech of the wheels on the track, a mechanical symphony that sounded sweet, pure, and unbroken. The war was over. I had lost the battle, but I had won the war. And the cost of the victory was exactly one encryption key and the ego of a man who thought he was untouchable. Worth it. Every single bite.